Hey, everybody. We have taken a bit of a hiatus, as you probably have noticed. And you know what? The best part of taking a bit of time off is getting all of the messages from many folks over social media about the fact that they actually have missed Resilient. And I've gotten a lot of questions like, when are you going to do another podcast? So here we are today. And we are really back with a special conversation. And before I introduce our guests, let me just share a quick story. So I'm going to go back to October 9th, the middle of the night. It was a Monday. And my cousin, who lives in Santa Rosa, heard some frantic knocking on her door. And her husband and her were laying in bed, as most people would be doing at 2 a.m. And she's a 911 dispatcher. Her husband's a local policeman. And they heard this knocking on their door. Bang, bang, bang. And you know how it is when you hear a knocking sound in the middle of the night. You're like, what is that? And it just kept getting louder and louder and louder. And they quickly realized that they had to get up and go figure out what was going on. So they got to their door and they opened the door and they saw their neighbor screaming, "Get out of your house." And they quickly realized that there was smoke coming into their house and there was fire that was enveloping their neighborhood. And so they ran upstairs and they grabbed their two daughters, two beautiful daughters, and they literally just grabbed them and ran to their car. They took absolutely nothing. They sped away. And I remember them saying, we could barely see the signs on the freeway when we were getting on the freeway. We could barely see anything because the smoke was so bad. And like I indicated, their house was in Santa Rosa. And they came back the next day, and basically all they saw was rubble. And this really came full circle yesterday. I had the opportunity to tour the Santa Rosa, Sonoma, Napa areas with a group of local leaders. And we were basically looking at all the devastation, the people that were impacted by the fires. And what really stood out was a community in Santa Rosa where my cousin lived. And really, it's hard to express the devastation. It's hard to express it in words. And if you could almost just picture a very close knit community of hundreds of houses, and they literally were all gone. Pretty much as far as you could see, houses were gone, and it was rubble. You saw burned out cars, no tires on the rim. So you could just think about how hot it was and how fast the fire enveloped that area. And what's interesting, this was almost actually more than 2 weeks after the fire, and you could still smell the stench in the area. And I remember driving out of Santa Rosa last night, and I took a picture of people that are now camped out under the freeways. Because they lost their houses. There's nowhere else for them to stay right now. And the one thing, though, that was kind of the positive takeaway was all the signs plastered everywhere in the county. Signs thanking the first responders, the firefighters, the local policemen, all the volunteers near and far. And today, I'm really fired up to be speaking with Jake Wood, the CEO of Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon essentially deploys veterans into natural disasters really to help people in their darkest hour. And I will tell you, just observing this area, this was, although hopeful now, the darkest hour for many. But what I think is incredible about the mission, the purpose of Team Rubicon, is not only helping people in need, the folks that have been impacted by those disasters, but also helping the veterans who have come back from war and need to find purpose again. And I think that the veterans themselves have found purpose by being deployed to these natural disasters.
One of our favorite words around here is grit. Just the ability to clench your teeth and move forward. When I think of resilience, I think about life's going to punch you in the face. It always will. You can't flinch, right? You got to take it. You got to get yourself up. You got to dust yourself off, and you got to keep walking forward.
Welcome to Resilient, where we feature stories from leaders on crisis, risk, and disruption. And when I talk about leaders, I'm talking about CEOs, board members, and other leaders outside of business. And that's what we're doing today. And the reason why, I've thought about this a lot, the reason why I started Resilient was to talk to these leaders, but really to get their stories. And I think the power of story is incredible because it's what allows us to really understand what these leaders went through, what they thought at the time, but then most importantly, the lessons that we all can collectively take away, whether you're a business leader, whether you're a student, whether you're not even in the business world. There are nuggets in here that every one of us could take away. My name is Mike Kearney. I'm a partner in Deloitte Strategic Risk Practice, and I really have the coolest job. I moonlight with this Resilient podcast, but I have some other interesting things that I do within Deloitte. I serve clients, obviously. I lead our Brand and Reputation Venture Fund. And then I'm creating these new experiences to bring our solutions to our clients and our technologies in a very experiential way. So I couldn't ask for a better job. But really the purpose of today is not to talk about me, it's to talk with Jake. And specifically, what compelled him to move from his dream of being an NFL lineman to joining the Marines, and then really coming out of the military and finding purpose again with Team Rubicon. And then I'm really interested in talking to him about how Team Rubicon's mission has evolved and what plans he has for the organization in the future. Hey, we're sitting here with Jake Wood, the CEO and founder of Team Rubicon. You know, I wanted to start with a question about Pat Tillman. So he's actually a personal hero. If I showed you my computer, you'd see I have a sticker on there. I did the New York Marathon for Team Tillman, raised a bunch of money. He's one of my heroes. But I know that he was an inspiration to you, really, when you were kind of at that point in your life where you're thinking of NFL, but you ended up going into the Marines. So can you share a bit about that? Like, what inspired you to do that, and how did he play into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't, by the time I was making that decision, it wasn't the NFL or the Marine Corps. My talent had made that decision for me, or lack thereof. I was a freshman in college at University of Wisconsin on 9/11, and joining the military had always been something I'd thought about, had been interested in.
Do you have family in the military, or is just...
Yeah, my grandparents served in the military, like just about everybody's did during World War II. But I wouldn't say I came from a military family. But it always interested me, and so my freshman year, I sat there, and I think, like most young men and women, or at least the ones I knew, thought about joining up, you know, kind of in that surge after 9/11, and I watched as Pat Tillman did it. And as a football player, that resonated with me, but I didn't kind of have that same conviction that he did. And so watched, the country go to war for, over the next couple of years. And then my senior year, right before my senior year, Pat Tillman was killed in Afghanistan. And it was kind of a moment of reckoning for me, where I had to look in the mirror and think about, what type of person I wanted to be, if I wanted to be that person of conviction, that man of conviction that he was, and that ultimate, I'd like to, how I remember it is that's the moment I made the decision to join. But
it was building up to that for 3 years, it sounds like, to a certain degree.
It'd been bouncing around in my head. I was playing ball. I was wanting to make it to the NFL. That wasn't going to play out. So I had to make a choice about what I was going to do after I got done. And it was either going to banking or going to the Marine Corps.
Right on.
I guess Uncle Sam called.
So let me ask you, the one thing that I personally like about Pat Tillman's story is kind of, he's almost a paradox, because while he joined, the Army at that time, when he was fine with going to Afghanistan, but when he went to Iraq, I think he really was like, I'm not sure if I believe in what we're doing. So he was kind of a paradox. Like I said, did any of that kind of counterintuitive, or how he would really kind of challenge logic of everything, play into that at all for you? Or
I mean, Pat Tillman, from everything I've read, was certainly his own man.
Yeah.
He I don't think he was a blind patriot, despite being an amazing patriot. I think he had the wherewithal to think clearly and question what we were doing.
Yep.
If you read any of his biographies, you'll see that come through. He was always a bit of a contrarian,
right?
Which I think is kind of a part of his legacy.
So I always love talking about the youth, because I actually think that who we ultimately are is shaped by our early childhood experiences. Is there anything that you could point back to, when you were growing up, that had an impact on your value system?
Well, I grew up in a great family, nuclear family. My mother and father loved one another. My dad had a great job, wonderful sisters. So, I was set up for success early on. I think, if I have to reflect back and, think about kind of what formed me. I grew up in a Lutheran household. I would go to church every Sunday. I think that had an impact on my value system.
Yep.
It helped me shape a way of thinking of the world. But one moment, kind of a seminal moment in my childhood, when I was young, I was living in Europe. My dad got transferred out there for his job, and we were living in Austria. It was 1989. It was kind of the height of the Cold War.
Right.
So, really interesting time to be out there. But one weekend, my parents took my sisters and I to a former Nazi concentration camp, which was a museum. And I think that was, when you're young, like, your notion of evil is kind of shaped by, like Sunday school stories or maybe like some cheesy villain in a cartoon.
Right.
And
the Rambo movies. Or
not even. I'm talking like 7 years old. It's like the DuckTales and Ninja Turtles. It's like a rhinoceros in a suit of armor is your villain. And you go to a concentration camp and your eyes are completely opened up to what evil is. And that was pretty formative for me. Just seeing man's capacity for hate and evil, but also the kind of the last exhibit of the concentration camp was the liberation, and you get to see the best, people who left their families at home to fight off in foreign lands for people, and that was really what had led me to think about joining the military for most of my young adult life.
So who did you look up to when you were younger? Any heroes that you could point to? Not necessarily sports, but anybody. It could be, parents, sports players,
my
teachers.
dad was always a hero for me. He was just he was a really smart guy. He worked harder than anybody I knew. He taught me, he was a great father. He taught me a lot about, the type of person I needed to be. I read a lot of books, and so I'd count among my heroes, the people most would call, like the Lincolns and the Eisenhowers and, the Washingtons. But, and then it was sports, for me. It was the Atlanta Braves in the 90s. I was a TBS era Braves fan. Yeah. And Michael Jordan and the Bulls and all those guys. So
what made you go into football? What drew you to it?
Well, I threw like I had two left hands. I couldn't hit a free throw, and I hit a growth spurt and found myself 6'6", 240 pounds my sophomore year in high school, and that kind of destined me. My dad was a big football player. Yeah. He played briefly at Ohio State and, played some amateur leagues for a while in his 20s. And so, that obviously had a bunch of influence on it.
And Wisconsin, that's like offensive line university, right? That's what,
Yeah, it was crazy. After my junior year, I started getting recruited, and initially, kind of the state school started calling, and then Illinois, and then I never thought about Wisconsin as an option.
Where were you living at the time? I don't even know where you grew up.
So I was living in Iowa.
You were living in Iowa, okay.
But I had been born in Nebraska. My mom was a Nebraska alum, so I grew up a Nebraska fan. And in the '90s, that was an easy team to love. Right, 3 national championships while I was growing up in the '90s, and so Nebraska came calling. That was a dream come true. But I went up to Madison. Obviously, it's offensive line university. Yep. That's what I was playing. I thought I wanted to play in the NFL. Who doesn't when they're getting recruited? And so it kind of came down to two different schools. It was Stanford or it was Wisconsin.
Yep.
And I got into Stanford and I went out there. That was the first official trip that I took, where they pay to bring you out and all that stuff. Yeah. And that campus is it's the most, you can't even describe it, how beautiful it is. And, coming from Iowa, this is February.
Right.
So I leave, Iowa.
65, 70 degrees.
It's 15 degrees in Iowa when I leave. I land at 75 and sunny in California, and they're showing me around. And they just come off a Rose Bowl, appearance. So they had a decent program at the time. And then I go up to Madison, and it's funny because the offensive line coach there was just a no-nonsense guy, tough as shit. And, whereas Stanford would kind of shower me with praise, and, the offensive line coach at Wisconsin's like, all right, I want you to play here, but I'm not going to beg you. So either sign or we'll find somebody else. And I was just like, that's who I want to play for. Like this is a
it's like dating a girl, man. It's like, oh yeah, I kind of want to date you, but that's why you're attracted to them. Yeah.
It was wild. But I knew, I knew if I went to Wisconsin that it would be I'd be going against the toughest competition because they were only going to bring in the best guys. And I knew that if I competed and earned a starting spot, that the chance of playing in the NFL was near 100%.
Right.
But I also knew that, hey, there's going to be another Jake Wood's going to come in the next year. And it turns out they didn't recruit another Jake Wood. They recruited a guy named Joe Thomas who...
I was wondering because you have his jersey in your hallway. So
Joe's 2 years younger than me. Came into UW and basically that was the end of my career, going back to why the Marine Corps.
Well, that's a good person, man. Like, if you think about who took your spot.
I'm not ashamed of it. It's not like I lost my spot to some schmuck. It's like this guy was, he's the best that's ever played the game. Right. So I'm not saying that if he hadn't come in that I would have made the NFL. I might not have even started, but at least I have an excuse, right?
Right. So I've got going back to your time in the Marines, I've got an 18-year-old son, and it's like that pivotal moment about where he's going to go to school. And we've talked about going into the Marines or military. What's your perspective on that now? Like, what do you tell kids that are in high school or considering a military career about, how it impacted you, whether it makes sense or not?
I think the military, is, my wife and I argue about this all the time. Like, it's tough, right? Yeah. And it's hard on you. And if you're lucky enough that you can serve and never have to go to war, it's probably the best thing that you can do to get all those things people always talk about, the discipline, the integrity, all these things that it can instill in you, leadership. It is, I think, one of the noblest callings that, kind of remain professionally in our society. And, I think it's ultimately, it's one of the highest civic duties that you can fulfill.
Yep.
So I think it helps us make good citizens in stronger communities. But it'll wear you down. If you are called upon to go to war, like that's obviously what you're signing up for, and that's what the nation needs. You should be proud of that service. But war changes people, and you can obviously you can get wounded or killed. Mm-hmm. And I had plenty of friends who were both wounded and or killed, and you just have to come to terms with that before you have to kind of walk in to that decision eyes wide open to that reality. At the end of the day, we're an all volunteer force. We need people who are willing to look at that decision and say, yeah, that's what I'm willing to sign up for.
So we're not going to go into your military career in that much depth, but when you were both in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that right?
Yep.
What was it like coming back?
It was, it's hard to even remember, honestly. I came back from Iraq almost 10 years ago to the day. I was there in 2007 during the surge. It was, it was a nasty time. I think I came back feeling like I was invincible. We got beat up while we were there. We lost a bunch of guys. A bunch of guys got hurt.
Right.
I came home and I was unscathed, and I kind of felt like hey, I'm bulletproof, man.
Right.
And kind of acted that way, and went to sniper school. A few months after that, I went to Afghanistan, and same thing, just a really bloody tour, and came back, and I guess that what I was wrestling with was, I got back from Afghanistan. I'd spent basically the last 2 years of my life in war, and had grown accustomed to it. And so I was introspective enough to kind of pause and reflect and realize that it was becoming a little normal for me, and I didn't really like that. If I really thought about it, a lot of my friends were signing up for additional tours. They were re-enlisting, and it was a combination of they'd kind of grown addicted to it, and a combination of the mission wasn't done yet. I just sat there and I thought, man, I don't want this to define who I am. Well,
I read, and maybe it was in another podcast that you did, but you actually indicated that one of the biggest challenges is that adrenaline rush that you get in war. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, people miss it.
Yeah. You'll never feel as alive, as those moments when you're like literally staring death in the face. Right. And, that is, it's why people jump out of airplanes. It's why people drive a motorcycle 150 miles an hour down the Pacific Coast Highway. I mean, it's like those are exhilarating things to do. In combat, it's probably the pinnacle of that.
Yeah. Can you talk about how did you even get into natural disasters in the first place? I know there's quite an interesting backstory there, but maybe if you could share that.
Yeah, I mean, not by design. I was going to go to school and be a consultant at Deloitte.
And look at you now.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God I didn't get sentenced to that fate. No, so right before I joined the Marine Corps, I was waiting for my to get shipped to boot camp, and so I was, they actually had a backlog back in the day, so I kept getting delayed, and Hurricane Katrina happened. A buddy of mine from high school called me up, Matt Hall, said, "Hey, let's go down to New Orleans and help." I'm like, all right. So I drove, picked him up at Iowa State. He was, I think, finishing up another semester there, and we drove south, and it took us about 24 hours. We got down to the outskirts of New Orleans, and you couldn't get into New Orleans at the time. It was complete lockdown. So we just went into some areas around Lake Pontchartrain and started helping people. We had a couple chainsaws and stuff, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and went back, drank some beer, shipped off to boot camp, and 4 years later, I'm, January 2010, I just got out of the Marine Corps. I'm sitting around, I'm waiting to go to grad school, and the Haiti earthquake happens, and kind of the same thing. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, man, I could
actually do something.
I could actually do something. Unlike when I went down to Katrina, when I didn't know shit. Now I actually feel like I have some training and some skills, and so I called a couple of organizations. They all, none of them would take me as a volunteer.
You called them and said, "Hey, I'd love to go down and help you out," and they said, "No, we don't need anybody," or...
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what they said. Yeah. And listen, at the time, I was infuriated. Now I get it. If somebody called, and this happened, during Harvey, I had 50 people call my cell phone and say, "Hey, send me to Houston." It's like, no. I saw
you speak last week. I want on the...
That's not how this works. So I get it. But at the time, I didn't get it. And so, called a handful of friends. We ended up, committing to go. We organized a team. We got down to Haiti 4 days later, something like that, and started working. And just the whole thing snowballed. We had, doctors started flying in to join us, nurses, more vets. And, we just realized that everything we'd been taught in the military, short of how to shoot, was applicable down there. And so we came back and incorporated and, started building it.
That's the thing I'm curious about, because you obviously went through that experience and you said, gosh, I have an idea of something that we could do that's greater than just, this one incident. A lot of people have ideas. So how did you go from like, wow, this is, a cool thing that we could do, we can make a career out of it, to something that it is today?
Well, I mean, I don't have any other experience in this, but Haiti itself was an impulse, right? It was just let's go help, and we'll tell it over beers for the rest of our lives about that one time we made this crazy choice to go down to Port-au-Prince after an earthquake. So, we come back from Haiti and we kind of think, oh, this was cool, and we kind of thought of it like a club more than an organization. We just figured we'd have a roster of 200 or 300 guys, mostly from special operations backgrounds and doctors, and when bad stuff happened, we'd just
deploy out,
put the bat signal up, and we'd go. We did that in 2010. We kind of putzed around with it, weren't taking it. We took it seriously, but we weren't thinking in kind of grander scale. And it was 2011 before we actually. I dropped out of grad school. My co-founder moved from DC to LA, and we actually we started cranking on it full time. And it's hard to even say what happened, what changed, or why. I mean, there were things that started to indicate to us that it could be much bigger than we were thinking. But even 2011, 2012, we never would have imagined the scale that we've gotten to today.
Was there ever a time where you were like, God, this just isn't meant to be, or a roadblock that you had to overcome?
Yeah, like daily for the first 3 years. God, being an entrepreneur, especially a social entrepreneur, it's one of those things where you curse life every single day. Like you wake up and you just think about the weight of everything you got crushing you and all the challenges. And then at night you kind of go to bed and you're like, man, I wouldn't want to do anything else, you know?
Yeah, see, that's the thing that interests me is I just keep going back to that you had an idea, and this one is not even necessarily motivated by money. This is more by purpose.
No, in no way motivated by money. I can. My wife will assure you of that.
But something kind of pushed you to do that, and it had to have been the cause, or maybe it was the experiences, whether in Haiti or Katrina, where you saw the impact that you could make.
Yeah, I mean, helping people has always been a part of my value system. It's how I was raised, So, we had this opportunity to build something that could help people on a massive scale. And I think we found other people that shared that vision for making the world a better place. When you have the opportunity to do that, again, at scale, that's, it's a compelling... Right, it's a compelling reason to join.
Can you make it, for those people who may not know Team Rubicon or even some of these other groups that do this, bring a real life disaster to life for us. Like, what do you guys do, and how do you deploy, and what are your people in the field actually doing? So I don't know, we could use Harvey, the fires, any one of these examples.
Yeah, I mean, so we have two primary buckets that we can think about. We have international operations and domestic operations. 95% of the work we do is domestic.
Yep.
So, I mean, typically what happens, whether it's a fire, a flood, a hurricane, tornado, any of those things, rips through, it destroys the community physically. And so, you have these homeowners that are displaced, they go to a shelter. Typically, these shelters are managed by the Red Cross, maybe some faith-based groups. We're the organization that moves in and works with the authorities to actually stabilize the community and the structure. So we go through, we help the communities establish a common operating picture of what the damage looks like, and then we go through and systematically, clear debris, open roads, and help individual property owners stabilize their homes so they can get back into them faster. That's essentially what we do domestically. Now, Harvey was a little unique. We ran, some boat rescue operations. Those are rare occurrences where, the volume of a swift water rescue need exceeds the capacity of the professional authorities. But it did in the situation of Harvey. Obviously, it did in Katrina. Maybe happens every couple of years on a big scale. So we assisted there. Internationally, we mostly do remote medical work. So, earthquake happens in Nepal. We go in, we send, pretty elite medical teams, mobile medical teams in, and they'll go outside of the main cities into remote outlying villages and communities and deliver, sometimes life-saving medical aid, search and rescue capabilities. And with that is kind of a reconnaissance component where they can report back to authorities the damage that they're encountering, the needs of the population, things like that, so that aid gets distributed more equitably.
So can you connect it back to veterans? Because it almost seems like, and your motto is disasters are our business, veterans are our passion, which I love. I don't know who wrote that, but that's unbelievably compelling. Can you talk about, it almost feels like to me that the disasters are important, but it's almost helping veterans engage in something that has purpose. That's almost as important as helping the disaster victims. Is that right?
Well, I mean, we are a disaster response organization, and just like the motto says, that's our business.
Right.
And we exist to help people on their worst day. That's kind of what we talk about. And so we build the organization to help those communities in times of crisis. But we know that one of the outcomes that happens is that there's this huge impact on the people that are doing the work. The organization's 80% veterans. That's by design. And when we think about the challenges that many but not all veterans face when they get out of the military and return to our communities, is they have some of these reintegration challenges. And, and a lot of people focus on kind of the symptoms, and it's jobs, it's housing, it's access to healthcare, and I think those are all very important things. But I think the foundation of those issues most typically is a lack of purpose, and that's compounded by a lack of community and a lack of identity. And so we focus on, or we talk about how do you restore those three things in vets. And if you do that, we believe these are vets who are highly capable, highly trained. If you restore those three things, they're probably going to be able to go out and get a job, be a better family person, take care of their education, their healthcare, all that stuff.
Have you seen, and maybe not any stories necessarily, but have you seen an impact in the veterans that you've worked with? Meaning, has it made a tangible difference in their lives?
Oh, absolutely. We saw it very early. Anecdotally, we would have stories of veterans coming back talking about profound impact in their lives. The where we really knew we were having an impact there before we actually started measuring it quantitatively was you'd have spouses come and say, "Hey, thanks for giving me my husband back."
That's probably better than any quantitative measure.
Yeah, you have a spouse come and say, "Listen, I didn't even know who my husband was anymore, and now." That there's that spark inside him again, and that's the person that I loved and married, and that's pretty powerful when you hear that.
So, and hopefully you're okay talking about this, but I know that your best friend Clay Hunt was an integral part of Team Rubicon, and he took his life in 2011, and I read that actually impacted kind of the direction of the organization. Hopefully I've got that right, but can you talk about that?
Yes. So, Clay taking his own life back in 2011 was one of those, and maybe kind of the straw that broke the camel's back that led to William and I really committing to building this full time. It was kind of at that point where we were either going to just be some, diddly, hobby organization or actually, do
make
this,
something of
to
it,
make something of it. And, Clay's death, I think, revealed to me the power that this could have on veterans. Clay, he really, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, but I do truly think that it was a lack of purpose that led him to, ultimately pull the trigger. He just didn't see a life of meaning anymore. And he was always a guy that was searching for meaning.
So it almost goes back to what we were just talking about, with these veterans being now redeployed to these disasters. Now they feel purpose. And so his death, in some regards, it sounds like what you're saying, it was emblematic of what this organization could become.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, and at the time, we were really struggling with, is TR a disaster response organization, or is it a veterans organization? And we kind of waffled on that back and forth before really saying, listen, we are a disaster response organization, and the way we talk about it is, veterans, they aren't the object of our charity. They're the agent of the change we're making. So, really, I think that's a really important distinction, because everything we talk about is, hey, vet. You, Joe Veteran, you have something yet to give. Right. You have value. You have skills. We're going to use them. Oh, by the way, you're going to get something out of it. Right. Yeah. And just kind of realigning that messaging, I think, really resonates with those veterans who are searching for something, whether or not they know it. And a lot of people don't even know it.
They don't even know it, right? Yeah. Right. So one of the things I loved, although it feels like you've made a little pivot, so I'm curious, but I think in the early days, you guys were known for breaking the rules, like not necessarily playing by the rules when you go
stretching rules, breaking, stretching. What's the difference? Right?
And once again, thinking of this as a start, which it feels like a startup here. This is like one of the coolest places I've been. But I think in order for startups to grow and make an impact, you do have to break rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance. Yeah. I think if you want to have long-term enduring impact, you have to. You have to play well with others.
Right.
We know that. The rule, and many of the rules exist for a good reason. And once we began better understanding the rules and the framework, we understood, the why, and we were able to operate within that framework in a way that I think maximized its efficiency.
Right.
Now, I think what we still try to do is challenge norms, which are a little bit different than rules, right? Mm-hmm. It kind of the norms are the way things have always been done, and those are, I think, meant to be challenged in any industry or any sector, right?
Any good examples of things that you'd say, long-standing norm that's been out there, we've been able to kind of buck the trend?
I'll give you a good example, and this one caused some heartburn. So with Harvey. We quickly saw, like everybody else did, that this was going to be an event that exceeded the capacity of just about every organization and agency that was going to respond. Yep. So we knew that we were going to have to bring in volunteers from across the country, and that was going to, obviously that poses logistical challenges and all that.
Sure.
We've got a good relationship with the military. We actually have a one-to-one relationship with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Mm-hmm. So we say, well, hell, let's ask General Joe Dunford if he will make military airlift available for Team Rubicon volunteers out of these 10 cities across the U.S. Email General Dunford. He gets back to me immediately. He says, Jake, I don't know if this is possible, but if it's possible, we'll do it. And by possible, he meant like legal.
Right?
Yeah. And so
like somebody could fly you from these 10 cities.
So, that set some wheels in motion. And what we learned was that, this is possible, but the request has to be routed through FEMA.
Right.
And FEMA was understandably annoyed that this conversation was happening, without them at the table. And I get that. Yep. And, we were very apologetic, and, it was an ignorance on our part. Now, what happened was FEMA comes back and they say, well, we've never done this before. We've never requested military airlift for volunteer organizations. We said, well, don't you think you should?
Right.
Don't we think that, this is a norm that you're saying we've never done this before? We're sitting there, we're saying 100,000 structures have been damaged or destroyed. You need volunteer organizations on the ground to help these communities.
Yeah, ASAP. Yep.
Now, it didn't happen, right? We ended up not getting that military airlift. We ended up getting airlift from American Airlines, and it was awesome. But I think, though, we've now put the wheels in motion for FEMA to really think about this as a new normal, to request space available on some of these military flights to get agencies like ours on the ground faster and in mass when necessary.
Yeah, in many respects, one of the things that you're doing is you're asking questions that may never have been asked before. And even though you didn't get the answer immediately, maybe it changes the way things are done in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great, right? It's like, hey, let's email Joe Dunford and ask him for C-130s. It's like, you have to be kind of foolish enough to think that and then to act on it. And, one of the things we've always said, it's still at the top of every job description we post, is we're looking for people foolish enough to think they can change the world, smart enough to have a chance. So kind of that, we look for a little bit of that foolishness in people, just to think big and take chances. And
that's the way, we need to start posting our Deloitte positions saying that type of stuff. That's inspirational. So one of the things, and this is kind of a weird question coming now, given the fact that it's been a series of natural disasters, but how do you keep your volunteers, which are in the 50,000+, like
about 65,000? Yeah.
How do you keep them motivated and engaged when there's not a lot of natural disasters? So if you go back a year or two ago, what do you do to motivate them?
I mean, first of all, it's important to understand that there are disasters happening every day in this country, across communities all over the U.S. We'll respond to 70 this year. The average citizen could probably only think of 2 or 3 that happened.
I was blown away. You have a map.
Yeah.
Actually, I took a picture of it. Hopefully it's okay. We could post it. But I think I counted only 2 states that you guys have not responded. I don't know if that's right or not. But it looked
and
like
it's not because there haven't been
Dakota.
disasters in those states. Yeah. It's because we just haven't gotten to them, right? So there's, think about floods. Every year, the Mississippi River floods every 2 years. Yep. And it's not like a flood that impacts a community. When the Mississippi River floods, there's 10 states impacted,
right.
Hundreds and hundreds of communities all along those riverbanks. And so you could think about that as a flood, or you can think about that as there were 100 communities that were impacted. So, that means that there are 10 states from which TR volunteers can mobilize and deploy and have impact. But, so if we can kind of accept that there are hundreds of disasters in the U.S. and we're not even responding to, half of them yet.
Yep.
We keep our volunteers motivated and engaged through training. We really try to adopt that similar military mindset. One of the guys on our team has this saying: "When you rest, you rust." And so it's just you constantly have to train to stay sharp and avoid the rust.
I think I read this, and if I didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said, I was volunteer number 1, so I get this. Is there any disaster or any story that stands out above them all that just is like, oh man, this is where I knew I could make an impact?
Well, I mean, Haiti was, I think as bad a disaster as I hope I ever see in my lifetime. I mean, that country, that earthquake, the combination of those two, it was, there was so much suffering. And so, we saw there the ability to literally save lives. We were saving lives, delivering babies. I mean, it was insane. But every disaster has that on some level. Somebody's life is destroyed in each and every one of these situations. And if you really just boil any one of them down to that one homeowner, that one citizen who had their entire life upturned, they're all different, they're all unique, but that element remains the same. This person has suffered their worst day, and what can we do to help them?
Do you ever keep in touch with any of these people? I know that sounds random, but like from Haiti, have you ever seen or connected with any of them since you've been down there, or any of the other disasters?
I'm friends with a couple of our interpreters on Facebook. I haven't been to Haiti since I was down there initially. The Team Rubicon's returned a couple times for different reasons, but I myself haven't gone, and I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to get too emotionally tied up in those things.
Yeah.
We all kind of have our individual capacity for emotion, and it would quickly fill up if I was trying to stay in touch with all of these homeowners and even the volunteers as well. I wouldn't even have any capacity for my wife, and so you gotta watch out for getting too tied up in some of that.
What about plans to take Team Rubicon to the next level? What's like if you were to? I'm sure I've learned all the different ideas that you guys have floating around, but when you look at Team Rubicon in 5 to 10 years, is there anything that stands out? Anything that you really want to do?
Well, we want to do it all. I think that there's an opportunity. We talk about kind of weaving Team Rubicon into the fabric of America. Making it an expectation for service members to join it when they leave the military, making it an expectation that communities turn to us when they are in crisis. We're usually pretty boring when I get asked that question, because I just say we're going to do more and we're going to do it better.
What we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. What about, I want to pivot to leadership. So you've probably worked with some incredible people. Is there anybody that stands out that you'd like to identify, and maybe what they taught you?
I've been very fortunate. I was fortunate in the Marine Corps to be surrounded by good leaders. I learned from so the Marines I served with were the best Marines I ever met. They taught me a lot. They taught me a lot about accountability. They taught me a lot about selflessness. They taught me a lot about love. I mean, one of the things I learned early on is when you're leading people, and particularly in combat, you better love the people that you're with, right? Yeah. And what that means is they can't just be a Marine. They have to be your Marine. You have to know who they are, where they came from, where they want to go in life. Because that's at the end of the day when you're waking up and you're about to go out on that 200th patrol, and you got to convince them in the middle of the night to put their boots back on and put their flak jacket back on and walk out, for another counterinsurgency patrol. You can't just tell them to do it. You have to understand what is going to be the motivation for them. So I tell you, after 200 of them, the motivation starts to wane, right?
One of the things I've learned in talking with, I interviewed a lot of military veterans, is it's unbeknownst to many of us, you can't tell them what to do. You have to earn their respect. Yeah. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it's you can lead with rank or you can lead with respect, right. And at the end of the day, yes, you can tell them what to do, and if you outrank them, they will do it, yep. But they're not going to do it very really well.
Yeah.
And they're not they're not going to follow you enthusiastically, and if you can get people to follow you enthusiastically, you're going to win.
What about toughest decision you've ever had to make in anything?
Whew, man, toughest decision. I think the toughest decision usually center around people, and being a first-time entrepreneur, you didn't learn a whole lot about management at my level of the Marine Corps.
Yep.
So I didn't really have any management skills coming into this. This is the first real job I've ever had, so learning how to manage people outside the norms of the military was challenging. And so some of the hardest decisions I've had to make are around people. And it gets compounded in a job like this where they're here for more than money. So you're not just cutting people from their economic means. You're cutting them from a job that they're truly passionate about.
So you mean like if somebody just wasn't doing what they needed to do?
Yeah, letting people go. Yeah, it's a tough lesson to learn for young leaders. It was tough for me. And it's particularly problematic here just because even for the people we've had to let go, most of them, maybe not all, but most of them were so passionate about the organization that, it's hard to let anybody go because you're cutting off their economic means of living, right? Whether they have a family or not. But when you cut that and you're effectively severing them from something that they truly love, that's tough. It's really hard.
So we named this podcast Resilient. And I would imagine you, of anybody that we've had on, just because of your military days and then also all the recovery efforts, have seen resilient people. What do you think of when you hear that word? Like, what terms or what attributes come to mind?
One of our favorite words around here is grit. Just the ability to clench your teeth and move forward.
Right.
We've always valued grit and tenacity, and I think when I think of resilience, I think about life's going to punch you in the face. It always will. It's punched me in the face numerous times, mostly figuratively, sometimes literally. And you can't flinch, right? You got to take it. You got to get yourself up. You got to dust yourself off, and you got to keep walking forward. And and grit your teeth, right, or clench your jaw, and so.
It's interesting, grit. There was, I forget who wrote this article, but it is the number one determinant of a kid's success.
Yeah, I read that too, and I thought it was really fascinating.
Because everybody's like, oh, no, it's great, or what school you go to. It's your ability to kind of persevere.
Yeah.
And clench your teeth, like you said.
Yeah, just you know what? Like, tighten up that jaw and just walk forward into that uncertainty, walk through the adversity. It's interesting. We have, I've recently seen some people who lacked that, and it actually just shocked me. I saw people kind of buckle under the weight of life, right, and what was happening, the life that they were experiencing was kind of like, it's life.
Too great for them, yeah.
It was sad circumstance, like that. I had empathy. Like, hey, that sucks. Life punched you in the face. Right. Why are you crumpling like a paper tiger right now? Like, get up, dust yourself off, come back to work.
What an incredible conversation. Jake, if you're listening, thank you very much. I can't tell you how awesome it is for me to sit here with leaders and ask them any question that I want. And really, when I prepare for these, the way that I think about it is I ask questions that I am super curious about. And hopefully that translates to questions that you all would ask as well. And the answers that Jake gave us today, wow, that was awesome. I really appreciate everybody out there listening to Resilient. Once again, I get a lot of feedback, a lot of commentary on social media, which is fantastic. And we couldn't produce this podcast without a great partnership with our friends at Rivet Radio. So Janine and others, thank you very much for everything that you do. One of the things I would say is, as I indicated at the beginning, we've been on a bit of hiatus, which has given me the opportunity to go back and look at all the different interviews that we've done over the last 18 months. And, I'm so proud of the different folks that we've interviewed and so thankful that they've given the gift of time. I reflected back on that incredible day in Savannah, Georgia with Keith Wandell, or that awesome day, I think think it was in Grapevine, Texas, with Paul Raines, the CEO of GameStop. He's the one that mentioned his nemesis, pork fat. I will never, ever forget that. Or Jackie Rice, a really good friend of mine, the chief risk officer at Target, really giving insights in the way you can create valuable risk programs. And I'll say, if you enjoy these conversations, I'd encourage you, or I'd ask you as a favor, just to share it with some friends and colleagues at work. And one of the things I talk about all the time is, I've shared it with folks that are not in the business world, and they've said, wow, this is interesting because I'm able to pull a lot of insights out that translate into my life. So don't be bashful, share it with friends and family. And if you have a minute, I would be so appreciative if you just go on to iTunes or your podcatcher of choice and give us a rating. Tell us what you think. And then finally, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter or any of the social media channels and let me know what you think. And most importantly, if there is somebody, a leader out there that epitomizes a resilient leader, let me know, because I would love to talk to them. And, quite frankly, most of the folks that I interview are recommendations. So if you reach out to me and you have a great recommendation, I likely am going to reach out to them and hopefully we can get them on the podcast. And if you're looking for me, once again, my name is Michael Kearney. Last name is Kearney. Send me a message and let me know what you think.